All right, good morning, everybody. We are starting today with Shrimad Bhagavata Mahapurana, Book 10, Discourse 55, which is entitled The Story of Pradyumna's Birth. So we are now skipping to some time after the last event we read about, which was the marriage of Krishna and Rukmini. Some years after. Sri Shuka began again. Having been burnt in his former birth by the wrath of Rudra, the god of destruction, Kamadeva, the god of love, or more accurately, the god of sensory pleasure, a portion of Lord Sri Krishna, sought for his part him alone once more for investiture with a body. In other words, sought Krishna to be his father. Sprung from the loins of Sri Krishna, the self-same Kamadeva was born of Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, and became widely known as Pradyumna, and proved to be a compeer of his father in every respect. Coming to know Pradyumna to be his enemy, his fated future enemy due to a prophecy, the demon Shambhara, who could assume any form at will, carried off the baby from the lying-in chamber while it was not yet 10 days old, and casting it into the sea, went home. A mighty fish swallowed it, and the former too, the fish, was, along with others, enmeshed in a huge net by fishermen. The fishermen brought the fish as a present to Shambhara, and the cooks in charge of his kitchen took it into the kitchen and cut the wonderful fish with a knife. Discovering a baby in the bowels of the fish, they handed it over to Mayavati, a maidservant of Shambhara, whose mind was full of doubts. And the celestial sage Narada presently told her everything as to who the baby was, how it was born, and how it had made its way into the bowels of the fish. The maidservant was, really speaking, no other than the illustrious consort of Kama, Rati by name, Rati Devi, who had been eagerly awaiting all the while the reincarnation of her spouse, whose body had been burnt to ashes by Lord Shiva. Having been entrusted with the work of cooking pulses and rice, she fastened her affection on the baby now that she had come to know the child to be none other than Kamadeva, the god of love, and actually her husband. At no distant date, Pradyumna, the son of Sri Krishna, attained the prime of youth and kindled love in the breast of women who gazed on him. Lovingly, especially because he is literally Kamadeva incarnate and is as every bit as attractive, even as Krishna. Lovingly regarding him, her husband, who had eyes big as the petals of a lotus and exceptionally long arms, who was charming among men, with bashful smiles and upraised eyebrows, Rati, O dear Parikshit, greeted him with amorous gestures. Lord Pradyumna, the son of Sri Krishna, said to her, "Your affection has got perverted, inasmuch as having abandoned your motherly sentiment, you are behaving as a paramour or mother." Rati replied, "You are the son of Narayana, who were stolen away by the demon Shambhara from the lying-in chamber. I am your appointed wife, Rati, and you are Kama, my consort. While you were not 10 days old, the said demon Shambhara cast you into the sea, where a fish devoured you, and from the bowels of that fish you have reached this place, the residence of Shambhara, my spouse. Get rid of this demon, your formidable foe, difficult to conquer, knowing as he does hundreds of wiles, by recourse to similar wiles, like stupefaction. Overwhelmed with parental affection, your afflicted and disconsolate mother, your real mother, in other words, is wailing like a she-osprey whose young has departed, or like a cow deprived of its calf." Advising him thus, Mayavati, which is the name by which the goddess Rati is going, imparted to the high-souled Pradyumna a spell called Mahamaya, which was capable of undoing all kinds of wiles. Approaching Shambhara, Pradyumna accordingly challenged him to a combat, reproaching him with unbearable taunts and stirring up strife. Taunted with abuses, Shambhara, like a serpent trodden underfoot, sallied forth mace in hand, his eyes suffused with blood through indignation. Whirling his mace with great velocity and hurling it at the high-souled Pradyumna, he uttered a roar harsh as a clap of thunder. Beating back with his own the mace as it came flying at him, the almighty Pradyumna angrily hurled his own mace at the enemy, a protector of men. Fully resorting to the elusive demoniac devices taught by Maya, the demon rained a volley of missiles on Pradyumna, the son of Sri Krishna, himself remaining unperceived in the air. Being plagued with the shower of missiles, Pradyumna, the son of Rukmini, who was a great car warrior, we have heard of no sign of him having been trained, so presumably he is a great car warrior due to his divine birth and being, in fact, a god incarnate. Brought into use a great charm consisting purely of sattva and capable of rendering ineffectual all kinds of elusive devices. The demon then employed hundreds of elusive devices practiced by the Guhyakas, Gandharvas, Pishachas, Nagas, and Rakshasas. The celebrated Pradyumna, the son of Sri Krishna, counteracted them all. Taking up a sharp-edged sword, he then forcibly severed from Shambhara's body his head with a coppery beard and mustaches, along with his diadem and earrings. Being showered over with heaps of flowers by heavenly beings who were singing his praises, Pradyumna was taken to Dwaraka through the air by his consort Mayavati, who is capable of journeying by the air. Like a cloud attended with lightning, Pradyumna descended with his spouse from the sky into the magnificent gymnasium crowded with hundreds of ladies. Seeing him, somber as a cloud and clad in yellow silk, with exceptionally long arms and reddish eyes, wearing a winsome smile and a charming countenance, his lotus-like face graced with locks of dark blue curly hair, and thinking him to be Sri Krishna, the ladies, so the story goes, hid themselves wherever they could out of bashfulness. Concluding gradually, through slight dissimilarity, that he was not Sri Krishna, the ladies went up to him overjoyed, yet greatly amazed to find him accompanied with an excellent young lady. Presently Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, the corners of whose eyes were dark and who was gifted with a sweet tongue, recalled on that occasion, through similarity of features, her own lost son, milk flowing from her breasts through maternal affection. And she said to herself, who could this jewel among men with lotus eyes possibly be? Again, whose son may he be, or by whom was he born in her womb, and who, in fact, may be this young woman obtained by him? My own son, too, who was stolen away by some evil spirit from the lying-in chamber and has been missing all these years, must have attained an age similar to this boy's age and come to possess similar features, should he be living anywhere. But how could this boy acquire such similarity of form with the Lord bearing the Sharanga bow and point of features, limbs, gait, voice, smiles, and glances? Or he may undoubtedly be the selfsame boy who is born in my womb, for great is my affection for him and my left arm is throbbing. While Rukmini, the princess of Vidarbha, was thus speculating, Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, of excellent renown, made his appearance there, along with his parents Devaki and Vasudeva. Although the whole truth was fully known to him, Lord Sri Krishna remained quiet. The sage Narada, however, narrated to them everything, as to how the demon Shambhara had stolen away the boy while he was yet a baby, and so on. Hearing of that great miracle, the baby's escaping alive and unhurt from the bowels of a fish, and his subsequently killing a powerful demon, the ladies of Sri Krishna's gymnasium greeted with joy the boy who had been missing for many years, and had returned, as it were, though dead, though they thought he had been dead. Devaki and Vasudeva, Sri Krishna and Balarama, as well as Rukmini and the other ladies, were transported with joy to embrace the newly arrived couple. Hearing that Pradyumna had returned, though long lost, the citizens of Dwaraka, so the story goes, said to one another, "Oh, the boy has by good luck come back as it were, though dead." Indeed, it is no wonder that when Pradyumna, whose very thought agitates one's mind, nay, who was an exact likeness of the personality of Sri Krishna, the abode of Rama, the goddess of beauty and good fortune, came within sight, even his mothers, who often took him for their own spouse due to his close resemblance with his father, sought seclusion out of modesty or a sense of strangeness that they can't easily tell the difference between the father and the son. So alike are they in appearance. Much more did other women feel like that in his presence. Thus ends the 55th discourse entitled The Story of Pradyumna's Birth in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. Discourse 56, the story of the Syamantaka gem, and Sri Krishna weds Jambavati and Satyabhama. Sri Sukha began again. Having done a wrong, Satyajit gave away to Sri Krishna of his own accord, after due exertion, his daughter Satyabhama along with the Syamantaka gem. The king Parikshit submitted, "What wrong did Satyajit perpetrate against Sri Krishna, O Holy One? Wherefore was the Syamantaka gem got by him, and why did he give away his daughter to Sri Hari?" Sri Sukha replied, "The sun god, though adorable in the eyes of Satyajit, his devotee, behaved as a loving friend to him." In other words, though Satyajit, who was a devotee of the sun god, adored Surya as his god, Surya treated Satyajit as a friend rather than as like a servant. Pleased with him, the sun god bestowed on him this Syamantaka gem. Wearing that gem about his neck and shining as the sun because of that gem, Satyajit entered Dwaraka, but could not be identified, O king, through his dazzling brilliance. Gazing at him from a distance, their eyes blinded with his splendor, and suspecting him to be the sun god, people reported his arrival to the Lord, who is playing at dice, by saying, "Hail to you, O Narayana, the wielder of a conch, discus, and mace, O Lord, who had a cord tied about your abdomen, O lotus-eyed one, O protector of cows, O scion of Yadu. Dazzling the eyes of men with his rays, here comes the glorious sun god with intent to see you, O Lord of the universe. Indeed, the foremost of the gods, Brahma and others in the three worlds, seek the way to you. Having come to know you as living incognito as present among the Yadus, the sun god comes to see you, O Lord." Sri Sukha continued, Sri Krishna, the lotus-eyed one, heartily laughed to hear the report of those unknowing persons and observed, "He is not the sun god. It is Satyajit glowing with his gem." Entering in state his own splendid residence, which had been consecrated as a mark of festivity, Satyajit caused the gem to be duly installed by Brahmanas in the apartment intended for gods. In other words, in the temple room inside his residence. The gem, O Lord, yielded from day to day gold weighing 8 bharas, which is a unit of measurement equivalent to 3 maunds and 5 seers approximately. In other words, a significant measure of gold manifests miraculously every day from the gem. Famine, pestilence, and other calamities, serpents, mental worries, and bodily ailments, and other evils and rogues no longer exist where the gem stands worshipped. Though solicited once by Sri Krishna, who thought that the king was the fittest person to possess such a wonderful gem, Satyajit, covetous as he was of wealth, did not hand it over to Ugrasena, the ruler of the Yadus, not foreseeing the consequences of rejecting the request of Sri Krishna. Wearing that gem of surpassing luster about his neck, one day, Prasena, the brother of Satyajit, went about on hunting on horseback in the forest. To explain the geography here just a little bit, the Bhagavatam has repeatedly referred to Dwaraka as being like sea-girt or surrounded by the sea. It's not an island, though, and it's never called it an island. It's a peninsula. It is almost entirely surrounded by the sea, but there's a land bridge connecting it with the coast of Gujarat. So anybody going from Dwaraka to hunt in horseback in the forest would be going onto the mainland, off the peninsula, and would be in a coastal forest near the coast of Gujarat. Having killed Prasena, horse and all, and snatched the gem out of curiosity because of its uncommon luster, a lion was, while entering its mountainous cave, made short work of by Jambavan, the celebrated king of bears of Ramayana fame, who wished to have it. The latter, for his part, used the gem as a plaything for his boy. So that was quite a quick whirlwind series of events. And indeed, had Satyajit followed Krishna's advice to him, his brother may still have died, actually. He may or may not have still gone hunting. Perhaps he wouldn't have, or not in the same place. Or perhaps the light, the unusual glow, may have attracted the lion. But in any case, this would have gone down differently, at least with respect to the gem. Not finding his brother back, Satyajit, the other brother, felt very miserable. And he said to his trusted confidants, "Surely my brother, who has gone to the forest with the gem about his neck, has been killed by Sri Krishna, who he suspects of coveting the gem, since he had asked for it, although not for himself, but for Raja Ugrasena." Hearing that, people of a malicious disposition spread the rumor in a whisper from ear to ear. When the Lord learnt this, he followed the tracks of the horse carrying Prasena, along with some citizens of Dwaraka, in order to wipe off the imputation cast on him. Discovering first Prasena as well as his horse killed in the forest by a lion, people further saw the lion itself killed on the mountainside by a bear. The Lord stationed the people outside and entered alone the fearful cave of Jambavan, the king of bears, which was full of thick darkness. Espying there, within the cave, the excellent gem converted into a toy for an infant, and resolved to carry it away, the Lord waited there by the side of the baby bear. The nurse shrieked as though afraid to see that wonderful human being. But really it was on perceiving his intention to carry the gem away and raising the alarm. So this is evidently an entire kingdom of bears of intelligence equal to humans. They're spoken of in the Ramayana as well, these bear people. And not just spoken of, but they played a major part in the Ramayana. They sent an entire army to fight alongside Rama. Enraged to hear the scream of the bear nurse, Jambavan, the foremost of the mighty, rushed to meet him. Thinking him, Krishna, to be an ordinary mortal, and failing to perceive his greatness, Jambavan, full of rage, actually fought with the said Almighty Lord, his own master. A most tumultuous duel ensued between the two, keen as they were to overthrow each other, like a pair of hawks contending for a piece of flesh, and fought with weapons, rocks, trees, and arms, and struck each other with their fists, which fell as severely as the strokes of lightning. The combat raged day and night without a pause for 28 days. Jambavan, of course, is essentially a demigod-like being himself. He's been alive since the time of the Ramayana, essentially an immortal bear god who lives in the mountains. Having his many joints and muscles pounded with the strokes of Sri Krishna's fists and his strength and courage depleted and limbs perspiring, after 28 days, Jambavan spoke to him, highly astonished. "I conclude you to be the all-powerful Vishnu, the most ancient person, the suzerain Lord, the life energy, the organic power, the strength of mind as well as the bodily strength of all created beings. Indeed, you are the creator of Brahma and others, as well as the reality that underlies even created substances, the ruler in the form of the time spirit of those that control and destroy others, the supreme self of embodied souls. You are the same Lord Ramachandra, my master, to whom the ocean, with its makaras and whales thrown into agitation by your casting sidelong glances, marked with anger slightly kindled, allowed passage, yet by whom a bridge was constructed as an embodiment of his own glory, by whom Lanka was set on fire, and severed by whose arrows the heads of Rakshasas fell to the ground. To his devotee, Jambavan, the king of bears, by whom his identity, which is all consciousness, was thus directly perceived, O Maharaja, the lotus-eyed Lord Sri Krishna, the son of Devaki, spoke in a voice deep with emotion, stroking him with his soothing hand out of supreme compassion. For the sake of this gem, did we arrive at your cave, O chief of bears, whereas I came here inside the cave with a view to wiping off the false imputation against me through that gem. Thus addressed by Sri Krishna, Jambavan joyfully gave away by way of worship, his own daughter, Jambavati, along with the gem. So the tradition goes. This indeed refers back to, in the Ramayana, there's a verse mentioning that Jambavan wished that he had a daughter who he could marry off to Rama. And Rama essentially declined. Jambavan didn't even have a daughter yet at that time. But also Rama said that he did not wish for any wife other than Sita. But, excuse me. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cough. But there was a story that Rama promised to fulfill this boon of Jambavan's in the age to come. And so as Krishna, he came and did marry the daughter of Jambavan. Not finding Sri Krishna, the scion of Shurasena, returned since he entered the cave and disappeared into it. The people that had accompanied him to the mouth of the cave returned to their city of Dwaraka full of grief, having waited for 12 days outside the cave. Hearing that Sri Krishna had not come out of the cave, Devaki, Sri Krishna's mother, the divine Rukmini, Sri Krishna's premier spouse, and Vasudeva, as well as his other relations and kinsmen, grieved for him. Cursing Satrajit, the aforesaid citizens of Dwaraka, stricken as they were with grief, worshipped the goddess Durga, who they called by the name of Chandrabhaga, the Parashakti, for the return of Sri Krishna. Thanks to their worship of the goddess and the benediction pronounced by the goddess Chandrabhaga in response to their prayer. As a matter of fact, the said Sri Hari appeared in their midst, accompanied by his new bride, Jambavati, the bear princess. And gladdening them all by his dramatic appearance, his purpose in the shape of the recovery of the Syamantaka gem and the clearing of his own name having been accomplished. All were filled with great joy to find Sri Krishna, the ruler of the senses, as though returned to life after death, with his new bride and with the gem about his neck. Duly summoning Satrajit into the royal presence at court, and having told him how he had recovered the gem, the Lord handed it over to him to prove that he certainly hadn't murdered his brother for it. He, in fact, gave it straight back to him as soon as he got home. Full of great shame, Satrajit took the gem, and with his head cast down, returned home thence, repenting for his sin. Brooding over that sinful act of his alone, that he had wrongly accused Krishna of having not only coveted the gem, but murdered his brother. And feeling nervous over the unpleasantness of it, created with the mighty Sri Krishna, he thought, how shall I be able to wipe off my guilt? And how could Sri Krishna be conciliated? What course will prove expedient for me? Or what should be done so that people may not curse me, short-sighted, mean, stupid, and covetous of wealth as I am? I shall give away to him my daughter, a veritable jewel among women, as well as the Syamantaka jewel. This will be the proper remedy, as there will be no end of quarrel otherwise. Having thus resolved by recourse to reason, and moving in the matter himself, Satrajit made a present to Sri Krishna of his own blessed daughter as well as of the gem, so the tradition goes. The Lord espoused, according to the scriptural ordinance, the said girl, Satyabhama by name, who was solicited by many, and was gifted with an amiable disposition, comely appearance, magnanimity, and other similar virtues. The Lord said, O protector of men, we would not accept the gem. Let it remain with you, a devotee of the sun god. We shall only enjoy its fruit in the shape of the abundant gold that it yields each day. Thus ends the 56th discourse, forming part of the story of Syamantaka, and the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. So Krishna had earlier recommended that Satyajit give the gem to Ugrasena. He never wanted it for himself, and that's why he's declining it when it's offered to him. Discourse 57, Syamantaka stolen, Shatadhanva killed, and Akrura recalled to Dwaraka. Sri Shuka began again. Hearing about the sons of Pandu and Kunti having been burnt to death, although the truth was fully known to him, Sri Krishna proceeded to Hastinapura, the capital of the kingdom of the Kurus, accompanied by Balarama, for a friendly inquiry after their family affairs, by way of condolence. So this is referring to events going on in the Mahabharata. Of course, Sri Shuka isn't filling Parikshit in on all of this because he's literally talking, these events pertain directly to Parikshit's own family, and Parikshit, of course, knows all about this. But what's going on is that you all probably are familiar with the story as well. But the Kauravas, in their familial rivalry with the Pandus in Hastinapura, invited the Pandus to stay in a countryside estate, which they rigged to burn down and attempt to kill them all in a fire. And the Pandavas, realizing that there is a plot out to murder them, escaped the fire, but faked their own death in it and have now gone into hiding. And so what has been put about publicly at this time is that the Pandavas did die in the fire. And it's on that basis that Krishna is making a visit to Hastinapura to give his condolences for their deaths and so on, even though he, being omniscient, is aware that they are not dead. Meeting Bhishma, Kripa, Vidura, and Gandhari, as well as Drona, and equally sharing their grief, so the tradition goes, the Lord said, "Ah, what a pity," and so on. Seizing this opportunity afforded by the absence of Sri Krishna from Dwaraka, O king, Akrura and Kritavarma said to Shatadhanva, "Why should not the gem be taken possession of? Why should not Satyajit, who having solemnly promised us his jewel of a daughter, that she would marry one of them, yet disregarding us, gave it away to Sri Krishna, be made to follow the fate of Prasena, his brother? His mind having thus been poisoned by them, that vile and most wicked fellow, whose life had now been spent, murdered Satyajit in cold blood out of greed while he was asleep." This is evidently and this is often given as a traditional warning that of not being lax in one's following of the path of dharma, that even someone like Akrura, who was a sincere devotee of Krishna, has in the course of the years, in the past 15 years or so, however long it's been since we last checked in with Akrura, has evidently taken a dark turn in his life, that he would murder someone over sheer greed and think to steal something while Krishna is away, as if he won't know. But anyway, Akrura and Kritavarma talked Shatadhanva into murdering Prasena, or not Prasena, murdering Satyajit, Krishna's own father-in-law, on their behalf. Having made short work of Satyajit as a butcher would slaughter animals, and taking the gem in the midst of the women folk who were screaming and wailing as though masterless, Shatadhanva withdrew. Overwhelmed with grief to behold her father slain, Satyabhama too piteously wailed, saying, "Ah, father, dear father, I am undone," and fainting. Consigning the deceased to a trough full of oil, in other words, to preserve his body while awaiting funeral rites. The afflicted lady, Satyabhama, drove all the way to Hastinapura and reported to Sri Krishna, who was already aware of the fact, being omniscient, the death of her father. Hearing the news and following the practice of the human world, O Parikshit, the two almighty brothers, since evidently Balarama had also gone with Krishna to Hastinapura, wailed with tears in their eyes, exclaiming, "Alas, a great calamity has befallen us." Returning forthwith from Hastinapura to Dwaraka, along with his consort and elder brother, the Lord made preparations to kill Shatadhanva and recover the gem from him. Alarmed to know of Sri Krishna's plans, and in his anxiety to save his life, Shatadhanva solicited Kritavarma for help, one of his co-conspirators, and the latter replied, "I dare not cross the two almighty brothers. Having given offense to them, who can, as a matter of fact, hope to live in peace?" Kansa was shorn of his glory through enmity with them and met his end, along with his followers. Jarasandha, the powerful ruler of Magadha, escaped with his life at the end of each of his 17 encounters, deprived of even his chariot. Having been refused help in these words by Kritavarma, he next sought Akrura for help. Akrura too replied, "Knowing the strength of the two divine brothers, who will dare antagonize them? Hail to the celebrated Lord Sri Krishna of marvelous deeds, who creates, preserves, and dissolves the universe by way of sport, deluded by whose Maya the progenitors of the world cannot comprehend his activity, who having uprooted a mountain even as a 7-year-old boy, held it up in one hand with as much ease as an infant would pluck up and hold a mushroom. Hail to that immortal and immutable self, the most ancient being." Refused help even by Akrura, Shatadhanva deposited the valuable gem with him, with Akrura, and riding a horse capable of traversing 100 yojanas, left Dwaraka. Mounting their chariot with a flag bearing the device of Garuda, and drawn by 4 horses possessing extraordinary speed, O Raja, Balarama and Sri Krishna drove in pursuit of Shatadhanva, the murderer of their father-in-law, of Krishna's father-in-law. Leaving the horse that dropped down in an orchard in the outskirts of Mithila, Shatadhanva took to his heels, so he rode the horse until it collapsed, probably killed it. Shatadhanva took to his heels, greatly alarmed, and Sri Krishna too chased him in rage. Lopping off his head with his sharp-edged discus, the Lord, moving on foot in fairness to the enemy who was going on foot, looked for the gem in his upper and lower garments. Sri Krishna, by whom the gem could not be found, since indeed it was not on Shatadhanva, he didn't take it with him, returned to their chariot and said to his elder brother Balarama, "In vain has Shatadhanva been killed, for the gem is not with him." Thereupon Balarama replied, "Surely that gem must have been deposited by Shatadhanva with somebody. Return to Dwaraka and trace him. I, for my part, long to see the king of the Videha territory, my most beloved friend." Since they happen to be right at his, almost at his doorstep, they're in his kingdom, having pursued Shatadhanva all the way there. And it's quite a long way away. It's all the way over on the east side of India. Observing thus, Balarama, a scion of Yadu, entered Mithila, the city of Mithila, O Parikshit. Delighted at heart to see him, the king of Mithila rose all of a sudden from his seat and worshipped Balarama according to the scriptural ordinance with appropriate presents. Honored by the high-souled Janaka, who is full of love, as we have been told earlier in the Bhagavatam, the Janaka dynasty is the ruling dynasty of Mithila, and all of the kings of Mithila go by the title of Janaka. Balarama sojourned in the aforesaid city of Mithila for a number of years. Later on, at the opportune time, Suyodhana, the eldest son of Dhritarashtra, and the leader of the Kauravas, also named Duryodhana, learnt the use of a mace at his feet. He was trained in mace combat by Balarama. Reaching Dwaraka, on the other side of the subcontinent, Lord Sri Krishna related to Satyabhama, his beloved spouse, the story of his having slain Shatadhanva, and nevertheless of his not finding the gem with him. anxious as he was to please her with that comforting news that he had avenged her father's murder. Then, with the cooperation of his kinsmen, the aforesaid lord caused to be performed in an appropriate manner all the obsequies that were conducive to the welfare in the other world of his murdered father-in-law. Sore stricken with fear to hear the news of Shatadhanva having been slain by the Lord, Akrura and Kritavarma, that had instigated Shatadhanva to murder Satrajit, went out of Dwaraka to escape his wrath. Akrura having gone abroad, portentous phenomena foreboding misfortune appeared before the eyes of the residents of Dwaraka, and agonies physical and mental, those brought about by divine agencies and those caused by other living beings, overtook them again and again ever since. So declare some historians, Vaishampayana and others, forgetting what has been stated before, O dear Parikshit. Is it ever possible that evil portents should be seen in the very home of the Lord, who is the abode of ascetics? When Indra, the god of rain, did not pour seasonal showers in his kingdom, the ruler of Kashi gave away with due, Kashi is more famously called Varanasi, same city, gave away with due ceremony to Svapalka, the father of Akrura, recently arrived at his capital, his own daughter, Gandhini by name. Thereupon Indra sent down showers in the kingdom of Kashi. Wherever stays the said Akrura, Svapalka's son, who has inherited his father's virtue, they say, though evidently with significant limitations, given that he engaged in a murder plot. Indra pours showers all round. Neither calamities nor epidemics appear there. Hearing the above quoted words of the elders, and though recognizing that the absence of Akrura was not the only cause of the evil portents, Lord Sri Krishna had Akrura duly brought back to Dwaraka and spoke to him. So evidently when Krishna's messengers arrived, Akrura did answer the summons, not wanting to appear super suspicious. The Lord, who was not only omniscient, but knew the mind, received him with respect, admonished him, and addressed sweet words to him, and smilingly said, so the tradition goes, that the glorious Syamantaka gem, surely lay deposited with you by Satadhanva, was already known to us, the Master of Charities. Master of Charities is a bit of a sarcastic taunt in this context. Satrajit having left no male issue, the sons of his daughter should offer oblations of water and rice to his spirit, and paying off his debts, should inherit the rest of his property. Yet let the gem, which cannot be easily maintained by others, remain with you, strict in the observance of religious vows. My elder brother Balarama does not trust me in the matter of the gem. Therefore show it and bring relief to your relations. Your sacrificial performances are going on unceasingly these days, on altars of gold, thus betraying that you possess the Syamantaka gem, for you could not otherwise get so much gold. Won over by gentle words in this way, Akrura, Svapalka's son, brought and delivered the gem, which was brilliant as the sun, wrapped in a piece of cloth. Presumably he had been up to so many elaborate yajnas because he was trying to somehow expiate the guilt of his having been part of one of the instigators of a murder plot. Having shown the Syamantaka to his kinsmen, Balarama and others, and rubbed off through the gem the blame resting on himself, who was suspected even by his own brother Balarama of possibly having been involved in stealing the gem. The Lord then gave it back to Akrura. He who simply reads, listens to, or ponders this most blessed story, replete with the exploits of the all-powerful Lord Vishnu, a story which destroys all sin, gets rid of his evil reputation and sin, and attains peace. Thus ends the 57th discourse, forming part of the story of Syamantaka, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Sanghita. And so Akrura did seem to get off at that. He will certainly have to face his karma for whatever share of the blame was rightfully his in instigating the murder that Shatadhanva committed. But Krishna, having gotten him to confess everything and return the gem and so on in public, forgave him for the rest of it and even let him keep the gem. Discourse 58. Sri Krishna's espousal with his 8 principal spouses. Of course, we've already heard 3 of them, so the rest of the 8, the remaining 5. Sri Shuka began again. Once upon a time, the glorious Sri Krishna, the foremost among men, accompanied by Yuyudhana and others. Yuyudhana is also often called Satyaki. He's a very famous figure in the Mahabharata. Drove to Indraprastha to see Yudhishthira and his brothers, who had been seen at the court of Drupada. So we've skipped, again, years and years ahead. And again, Shuka is not filling in Parikshit on this because this is shortly before Parikshit's own birth in his own direct family. Parikshit knows all of this stuff very well. But what has happened is that the Pandavas, who survived in secret the plot to murder them in a fire, have come back out in public and have built their own new capital city of Indraprastha, which in modern times is Delhi. It's still the capital of India. Seeing Lord Sri Krishna, the bestower of liberation, the ruler of all, arrived at their door, the valiant sons of Pritha rose at once, even as the senses become active on finding respiration returned. Embracing the immortal Lord, with their sins wiped off by the all-purifying touch of his divine person, those heroes were transported with joy to gaze on his countenance, bright with loving smiles. Bowing at the feet of Yudhishthira and Bhima, and then hugging, because it's customary to, when greeting people in Vedic culture, to bow at the feet of people older than you. So Yudhishthira and Bhima were born before Krishna. And then hugging Arjuna, who was technically 8 days older than Krishna, but that's close enough that they treat each other as the same age. He was in turn saluted by Nakula and Sahadeva, who were born after Krishna. Slowly approaching Sri Krishna, who was seated on an excellent seat, Krishna, which is of course Draupadi, but she also goes by the name Krishna because of her own dark complexion, who had been newly wedded and felt a little abashed and was free from reproach, bowed low. Honored and greeted in the same way by the sons of Pritha. The reason why she's a little abashed is because she married 5 husbands, which is highly unusual, and she's not yet used to meeting new people who know that she married 5 husbands, and so she's always kind of a little nervous about whether people are going to think that's weird. That's why she feels a little abashed upon meeting new people shortly after that. Although Shuka says that she was absolutely free from reproach, that there was in fact nothing wrong with this. She came and bowed low to Krishna. Honored and greeted in the same way by the sons of Pritha, Satyaki made himself comfortable in his seat. Treated with respect, others too, all the courtiers and companions of the Pandavas, sat in a circle nearby. Having met and greeted his father's sister, Pritha, whose eyes were moistened through excessive love, and hugged by her and questioned about his kinsfolk, he, Krishna, gave suitable replies to her and made inquiries in return about her own health, as well as about the health of her daughter-in-law, Draupadi. Recalling her numerous past sufferings, Kunti, whose throat was choked with nervousness occasioned by affection, and whose eyes were wet with tears, spoke to Sri Krishna, who reveals himself to his devotees in order to end their miseries. Happiness returned to us, and we were blessed with a protector the very moment my cousin Akrura was dispatched by you to inquire about our welfare the other day, remembering us, your relatives, O Krishna. The mistaken notion recognizing one individual as one's own and another as alien does not exist in you, who are the friend, nay, the very soul of the universe, yet constantly present in the heart of those who remember you. You end their sufferings. Yudhishthira said, I do not know what meritorious act has been performed by us, O Supreme Lord, in that you, who cannot easily be perceived by masters of yoga, have come within our sight, men of perverse understanding that we are. Entreated thus by the king Yudhishthira, the Lord happily spent there the 4 rainy months, bringing joy to the eyes of the residents of Indraprastha by his divine presence. Once upon a time, the all-conquering Arjuna, the slayer of hostile warriors, accompanied by Sri Krishna and clad in armor, mounted his chariot, distinguished by its flag bearing the device of a monkey, Hanuman, and taking his famous Gandiva bow and a pair of quivers containing an inexhaustible stock of arrows, entered a dense forest infested with carnivorous and other beasts for the sake of sport, meaning hunting. There he pieced with his shafts tigers, boars, bisons, rurus, sharabhas, gavayas, rhinoceroses, deer, hares, and porcupines. His attendants took such of them as were useful for sacrifice to the king Yudhishthira, the full moon having approached, and since they perform animal sacrifices on the full moon. Overcome with thirst and fully exhausted, Arjuna went to the bank of the Yamuna. When they had bathed in the river and drunk of its crystal water, the 2 great car warriors, Sri Krishna and Arjuna, noticed a maiden of comely appearance strolling about on the riverbank. Sent by his divine comrade, Phalguna, which is another name of Arjuna, went up to that beautiful and excellent damsel with well-set teeth and a charming countenance and questioned her, Who are you, and whose daughter may you be, O fair damsel? Where do you come from, and what do you mean to do? I infer you to be in quest of a match. Relate everything, O good maiden. Kalindi replied, for that was her name, Daughter of the glorious sun god, I seek Lord Vishnu, the bestower of boons of one's choice, who is worth wooing, for my husband, and am engaged in the severest austerities. I would choose for my spouse none else than that abode of Sri, O gallant one. May that Lord, the bestower of liberation and the refuge of the helpless, be propitious to me. Known by the name of Kalindi, I dwell in a palace constructed by my father under the water of the Yamuna, and propose to stay there till I am able to see that immortal Lord. So Kalindi is the name of the river, and she is herself the goddess of the river. Arjuna, who had conquered sleep, spoke accordingly to Sri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, and he too, who already knew what was going on, picked her up into the chariot and drove back into the presence of the Raja Yudhishthira. Sri Krishna had, as soon as requested, got built by Vishvakarma, the architect of the Devas, a most wonderful and picturesque city for the sons of Pandu, in the city of Indraprastha, where they are now. Residing there, in order to oblige his own people, the Pandavas, as well as their mother and wife, the Lord had some time before acted as the charioteer of Arjuna in order to consign Khandava to the god of fire. So this is referring to a bunch of famous stories from the Mahabharata that, of course, Shuka doesn't have to tell Parikshit because he knows all about this. That's his own family's story. Pleased with the aforesaid service, the said god of fire had at that time conferred on Arjuna, O king, the bow Gandiva, 4 white horses, as well as a chariot, a pair of inexhaustible quivers that contain infinite arrows, and an armor which could not be pierced by archers. Rescued from the conflagration, Mayasura, the architect of the Asuras, had built and presented as a token of gratitude to his friend and benefactor Arjuna an assembly hall in which optic illusion seized Duryodhana, who mistook a sheet of water for a paved floor, and vice versa. These are all Shuka's briefly referencing a bunch of stories Parikshit knows well that are told in the Mahabharata. Duly permitted by Arjuna, and with the consent of his other friends and relatives, Emperor Yudhishthira, and so on, the Lord, accompanied by Satyaki and others, returned to Dwaraka. Now, on a certain day, when the planets exerted a favorable influence and when the season was most propitious and a most auspicious nakshatra was in the ascendant, the Lord, who was supreme felicity personified, espoused Kalindi, and meaning married her, thereby bringing highest joy to his own people. Vinda and Anuvinda, the rulers of Avanti, which today is the city of Ujjain, who followed the will of Duryodhana, deterred their sister, who was devoted to Sri Krishna, from making her own choice in who to marry. Sri Krishna, however, forcibly snatched away Mitravinda, which that princess, daughter of Rajadhidevi, in the midst of other princes who stood gazing helplessly, O king. There was a very pious king of Kosala, Nagnajit by name. He had a brilliant daughter, Satya, nicknamed Nagnajiti, O Parikshit. Princes could not win her without subduing 7 excellent though wicked bulls with pointed horns that were most formidable and could not bear the smell of heroes. Hearing that she could be gained only by one who was able to subdue the bulls, Lord Sri Krishna, the protector of the Yadus, accompanied by a huge army, drove to Ayodhya, the capital of Kosala. Full of delight, the said king of Kosala was hailed with joy by Sri Krishna, while welcoming him by going forth to meet him, offering him a high seat and valuable articles of worship. Beholding Sri Krishna, the spouse of Lakshmi, who was not only after her heart, but was worth wooing in every way, arrived in state, the princess sought him as her husband and prayed, "If he had been constantly cherished by me as the goal of my sacred vows, let him grant my innocent prayers and be my husband. Through what effort can that Almighty Lord be pleased with me, the dust of whose lotus feet do Lakshmi and Brahma, as well as Lord Shiva and the guardians of the world, bear on their head, and who assumes from time to time embodied forms suited to his leelas with intent to maintain the standards of morality set up by himself." To Sri Krishna, who had now been duly worshipped, the Raja of Kosala spoke as follows: "O Narayana, O Lord of the universe, what can I, an extremely poor fellow, do for you, sated as you are with the bliss of your very self?" Sri Shuka continued. Full of delight, the Lord, who had taken his seat, smilingly replied to him in a voice deep as the rumbling of a cloud. "O scion of Kuru," the Lord said, "solicitation has been condemned by the wise on the part of the humblest kshatriya sticking to his own duty, O ruler of men. Yet in my eagerness to secure your friendship, I ask of you your daughter, since we are not prepared to pay any price." The king replied, in other words, that he has brought no gifts to give. The king replied, "Who else can be a more welcome match for my girl, O Lord, than you, the one abode of excellences, on whose bosom dwells Sri as an inseparable companion? With intent to, however, to secure a match for our daughter, a vow has already been made by us, O chief of the Yadus, for testing the prowess of suitors. Here are 7 excellent bulls, O gallant one, difficult to tame and hard to hold in check. Good many princes have been worsted by them and have had limbs broken. Since these animals must be curbed by you alone, O scion of Yadu, you will be the acknowledged bridegroom for my daughter, O spouse of Sri." Hearing of this vow and tightening his girdle, revealing himself in 7 forms, the Lord brought the 7 bulls under his control by way of sport. Tying them with cords, now that their pride had been curbed and their spirit broken, Sri Krishna, the scion of Shura, drew them when tied by way of sport, even as a child would draw toy bulls made of wood. Amazed and delighted at that feat, the king gave away his daughter to Sri Krishna, and the Almighty Lord espoused her with due ceremony, worthy as she was of him. Having secured Sri Krishna as the beloved husband of their daughter, the queens too derived supreme joy, and there was great rejoicing over this happy event. Conches, kettle drums, and big drums sounded. There was vocal and instrumental music, and the benedictions of Brahmanas were pronounced. Men and women clad in fine clothes and decked with garlands felt highly rejoiced. The king gave away as dowry 10,000 newly calved cows, and also sent 3,000 finely dressed young maidservants decked with a string of gold coins, 9,000 elephants, 100 times as many chariots, horses 100 times the number of chariots, and men servants 100 times the number of horses. Placing the married couple in a chariot, the king of Kosala, whose heart was moistened through affection, sent them attended with not only these servants and animals, but also a large army. Hearing of this, the highly envious kings, even though they had their spirit broken by the Yadus and earlier by the lusty bulls, intercepted Sri Krishna while he was taking the bride with him on the road, somewhere between Ayodhya and Dwaraka. Arjuna, the wielder of the Gandiva bow, who was accompanying the Lord and was keen to oblige his friend and cousin, repulsed them even as they came, discharging volleys of arrows at the Lord, just as a lion would drive away small beasts. Reaching Dwaraka with the dowry, Lord Sri Krishna, son of Devaki, the foremost of the Yadus, delightfully spent his time with Satya. Sri Krishna next married Bhadra, a princess of Kekaya, daughter of his father's sister, Srutakirti, offered to him by her brothers, the foremost of whom was Santardana. He further carried away single-handed, in an assemblage called for self-election of a husband, Lakshmana, daughter of the ruler of the Madra territory, endowed with auspicious marks, even as Garuda snatched away nectar. There were other such consorts of Sri Krishna, good-looking and numbering thousands, rescued from the captivity of Bhaumasura after killing him. And we will hear more about that. Thus ends the 58th discourse, entitled Sri Krishna's marriage with the rest of his 8 principal spouses, in the latter half of Book 10 of the great and glorious Bhagavata Purana, otherwise known as the Paramahansa Samhita. And I think that's probably a good stopping point for today. We next get into a whole other story cycle. Thank you guys for coming.
Thanks so much, Deva.
Yep.
Hare Krishna. Happy Ekadashi today, according to
Hare Krishna. Happy Ekadashi.
Nice. Yeah, perfect time to be reading this.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy Ekadashi, everyone.
Yeah, happy Ekadashi.
Thank you, Devala.
Thank you. Thank you all for
Namaste.
coming.
Hare
Namaste.
Krishna.
Thank you, Deva. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.